the remaining laws of the month of Nissan and the Passover season. So we'll be reviewing some miscellaneous laws that just didn't fit into the other videos. We'll also be talking about the very important Eruvin. And lastly, we're going to be talking about Chol, and we'll explain what all of these things are in the preceding video. So this video is probably going to be shorter than the next one, than the previous ones and the next one, simply because this is kind of the catch-all video where these things are very important, but to make their own videos, they'd take just a few minutes. So I thought I'd cram them all together and see how that goes. So I guess you guys will be the judge of that point. So first of all, I want to comment on a certain custom of Ashkenazim. I think it's Lindsay. I see it. I'm filming from my phone, and even with my glasses, I can still hardly see. But nice to see you, Shalom Aleichem. So, a certain custom of Ashkenazim is abstaining from kitnios, which are basically legumes. This includes everything from beans to rice, in some sense, even though it's considered chametz itself. But this also includes nuts and nut products. Now, a certain thing that Ashkenazim have to look out for is actually dried fruit. And this is something that might strike us as a little bit unusual because you think, what's wrong with dried fruit? Well, because in previous times, the way that fruit was dried made it susceptible to becoming chametzdik, that is, making it chametzy, making it something that we can't have during Passover. So there was the prohibition, unless these foods were guarded heavily, of not eating dried fruit during Pesach. So if you're going to be eating dried fruit, it's best to have a little mark next to the hechsher that says kosher Pesach or kosher for Passover, and that way you'll be sure that it is good for you. Again, this is a custom of Ashkenazim. Sephardim don't abide by this custom, so there's not a whole lot to look out for. Also, I know that there's at least one family that owns chickens that watches these videos, so I included this one just for you guys. There's many agriculturally themed laws in our codes of Jewish law, meaning the Shulchan Aruch. And a lot of these laws simply don't apply today, not because they were abrogated or nullified, but because most people don't raise chickens or livestock or anything of the like. The closest thing that we have are our dogs, and they're basically half children anyway. So whether the laws of chinuch apply to them, we'll leave that for another video. But we know that most people simply don't have animals nowadays besides pets. And these are usually domesticated animals like dogs, cats, hamsters, parrots, fish, alligators. Just kidding. So usually the barnyard type of animals, laws that apply to them are not usually pertinent to us. But this one is for you guys. So it's important that for those who have chickens or other livestock, other animals in general, that if you're feeding them grain, any kind of grain, that it's important to safeguard this grain and make sure that it does not get wet, that it does not contact any moisture or liquids. And namely, when we're talking moisture, we're talking something as thick as fog. There's moisture in the air constantly, right? There's always a certain level of humidity. We're not really concerned about that. What we're primarily concerned with is it having any traceable amount of liquid in the grain or on the grain or touching the grain at all. So however it's stored, we just have to be extra careful that it does not contact liquid. Now on a similar note, excuse me, on a similar note, we want to make sure that our dog foods, our cat foods, our fish flakes, I have no idea what those are made of, but maybe they come from the fish flake tree. They harvest it from there. But all of our pet foods, we have to make sure that they do not have any chametz in them, because we'll have to get rid of those for Pesach. Either our pets can eat them, we can sell them. Probably we can't eat them because they're not going to be kosher. But we have to dispose of them in some way because if they have chametz in the dog or the cat food or whatever, then these cannot be in our possession during Pesach. So, as with the rest of our chametz, we can sell it to a non-Jew, somebody who's not observant. Now, we cannot sell it to a non-observant Jew. It gets into some problems there, or rather, we get into some problems there. So we don't want to do that. What we're going to do is try to get rid of it, and then leading up to Passover, maybe instead of buying in bulk, we'll buy smaller bags or smaller cans or something. So, and then during Passover, we'll be probably just giving them whatever we're eating. So, or something that's not chometz stick. So, usually this is big treat time for the animals because they get to eat better food rather than the industrial grade crap. Freudian slip. I meant to say Captain Crunch because a lot of dog food is, the little crunchy nuggets. So, not mean to say crap. I see, looks like Lindsay has commented, and I thought that by clicking the screen, I could see the comments, and I can't. Okay, let's see. All comments are visible. There we go. Okay, and Lindsay brings up a good point. She says, I think you can also not eat eggs that were laid during the Yom Tov, and that is entirely true. That is correct. So any produce that we obtain during the Yom Tov, we have to save that for later. So, and actually, even this is something that we're going to be discussing of the laws of Chol Moed, that is the intermittent days of the holiday. That if we harvest any food, it has to be specifically for the holiday. So, unless all the food is going to go bad, which is an exception. Now, for these, I won't be getting into much of the agricultural laws simply because it doesn't apply to the vast majority of us. However, what Lindsay brought up is absolutely on point, and thank you for that, by the way. All right, so this leads us into the extremely complicated laws of Aerovene, and I'm not being sarcastic. For our purposes, they're going to be very simple, very general, very brief. But to discuss the laws of Eruvin in depth takes up an entire tractate of the Talmud. So there's obviously a lot to talk about, given that we won't be having all those debates and discussions, but we will be looking at them very briefly to give us an idea of what they are and what to do on a practical level. So the first kind of Erev that we're going to be talking about is the Erev Tafshilin, which is what? First of all, what is an eruv? An eruv is different than the word erev, right? Erev means night, and what we're talking about is the eruv, and it is spelled differently, as in addition to being pronounced differently as well. And what an eruv does is that it helps us and enables us to do certain things on Shabbos, on Shabbat, the Sabbath, and on the holiday, the Yom Tov. And so these are like power-ups, if we may, using video game terminology. These are power-ups to help enable us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So when a holiday, for example, when a holiday falls on Thursday and Friday, and we need to prepare food for the Sabbath, then normally we would be preparing on Friday, but there's the law that we don't prepare on one day for the next day. Not every day, but just for holidays and the Sabbath. So if it is Shabbat, we don't prepare on Shabbat for things to do on Sunday. During the holiday, we don't prepare on, let's say, the first day of the holiday for the second day of the holiday. Now, you can prepare one day, and if you happen to have, let's say, extra food or you clean a little bit too much, that is allowed to spill over into the next day. But we really need to be taking it one day at a time. So, there's the problem. When the holiday butts up against Shabbat, what do we do? Because we can't prepare the day before. Well, here's the magic of the Erev Tavshilin. The Erev Tavshilin, what it does is that it actually helps us and enables us, it permits us halakhically to prepare the previous day. So, what does this mean? It means that when we have an Erev Tavshilin, that we can prepare on Friday for Shabbos on Saturday and Friday night. So this is incredibly beneficial. So unless you just want to be eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches all day on Shabbos, then we need this beautiful thing called Erev Tavshilin. Now, when do we make, or first of all, what is the Erev Tavshilin? We just discussed how it functions, but we didn't quite talk about what it is. And basically, it is a full meal for one person at least, and it's any food that goes with bread. So that's up to you. And so we prepare this the day before the holiday. And I mean, I'm sure you can do it 2 days before, but as long as we have it prepared, we can keep it in the fridge. This is the wonder of modern refrigeration. We can keep it in the refrigerator and keeping in mind that this meal is the Erev Tavshilin. So this is what allows us to prepare for the next day. It's just having this meal available. Now, as we'll see in the other two forms of Erev that we'll be discussing tonight, they are also meals. Now, some of you might be more familiar with the typical, let's say, community Erev. Basically, the wires in the phone poles that sections off the part of the city wherein you can walk on Shabbat. Because as we know, there's this concept called the Sabbath day's journey, or walking a Sabbath's distance. And these wires connecting the phone poles, especially marked for the Erev, are the boundary lines of that distance to help us know where we can walk and where is too far. So it's a very helpful thing. But this is a very, well, all of these are very different types of Aerovene. And instead of wires or instead of walls with doors, as it's more halakhically described as, these are Aerovene of meals rather than an Erev of a wall. So the next type of Erev that we'll be discussing are Aruveitahumen. Now, what are these? These are Erevs that allow us to walk a Sabbath day's journey. And if you have a regular Erev in the city, with the wires and the phone poles, if you go by that, then this is something that already permits us. But if we don't have this, then this permits us to walk that distance. So basically, the Aruveitahumen allow us to walk that Sabbath day's journey. Which, for those of you who would like an exact number, it is 0.59 miles, or the distance from my old house to the gas station's corner, but not quite to the gas station. Not that any of you know where I live, or used to live, but I tracked it on Google Maps. I did the bird's eye distance measurement. I thought, oh, that takes me right to the corner. I never made use of it, but it was always great to know. Now, I do highly recommend that if you plan on keeping this, I highly recommend going on Google Maps, not MapQuest, but Google Maps. Maybe Bing can do it too, but Google is very helpful. And no, they are not today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is actually the Moxur, not Art Scroll, just the concept of Moxurin. And also, a third of a bottle of matcha. uh, what a show. Anyway, so I highly recommend that you go on whatever app, Google Maps, whatever, and you locate the distance from your house going roughly 0.59 miles and see where your Sabbath day's journey is. It's just good to know. Now, we might not always need to know where this is, but it is still important to know just in case we ever get into a situation where we do need it. Now, the last Erev that we'll be discussing are the type is Erev Haceros. Now, what are these? Now, if you've noticed, I've been saying Eruv, which is singular, and Aruveine, which are plural. And the last two, this type of Erev and the previous type of Erev, that is the Aruveitahumen and the Erev Haceros, these are, in a sense, broader categories of Erev. Now, what we are referring to when we are mentioning Erev Haceros are Eruvin that permit us to transfer from one domain to another. So typically on Shabbat, we would not be transferring from one domain to another. For example, from public domain to private domain. So from the city streets to our homes, or from the from the private domain to the public domain. So, for example, from an apartment building out into a public park or the city streets. Or if we're living in the country, then from our house to the yard. So will actually allow us, for the sake of the holiday, to transfer things in and out of our homes. So it allows us, for example, to carry our talis to shul, right? Our talit that has tzitzis on the corners. We want to make sure that we can bring this with us to shul, to the synagogue, and this is what allows us to do that. So, a very nifty invention. There are also other types of domains that are either not as common or not pertinent to tonight's video, so we won't discuss those. So the ones that everybody will definitely be able to relate to and probably be able to use is the Erev Haceros, which allows us to transfer from public to private and private to public. It also means that you can take your trash out. So we can take the trash out and put it into the trash can. Because of the prohibition on tying, we don't tie on Shabbat and holidays. So either tie it up before the holiday or take it up and maybe just pull the drawstrings and leave it in the trash can. So, or get your robot made to do it for you. Now, when Passover falls on Shabbat, which is what it's going to be this year. So we have a bonus Shabbat, or a double Shabbos in a sense. So something that we want to do is, if anybody wants to get a haircut, which is me, my hair is getting quite long and quite curly. My my hair's always been very short and it's becoming quite lengthy. So what I'm going to do before Pesach is get a haircut. Because from Passover to Lag BaOmer, we're not cutting our hair. Remember, Lag BaOmer rhymes with hair. Omer, hair. To remind us, this is only in English, by the way, not even in Yiddish. Um, Similar in Yiddish, but not exactly. It's har. It's where the English hair comes from. But Lag BaOmer is the deadline after which we are allowed to cut our hair. Now, Hasidim will go all the way to Shavuos, but from Pesach to Lag BaOmer, which is a month, we don't cut our hair. So if you are looking to get a haircut, now is the time to do it. Or the day right before Pesach, that is our last opportunity to get a haircut. So get your haircutting kit out now. Go schedule an appointment with the barber, whatever place you go to, and make sure you get this done before Passover. Believe me, you will want to do this. There's been a few years where I've skipped it and I've regretted it. I've been growing this out for about 8 months, and I'm ready to cut it. So, it's not even that long. But if you want a haircut, get it done. Also, while I'm on this subject of getting things done before Pesach, remember to get our Pesach cleaning done before. So, Pesach starts Friday evening, that is April 15th, for 2022. No other year, just this year. So, if the date is not the same for you next year in 2023, 2024, maybe Mashiach will be here, Ezras Hashem, then the dates will be different. But for 2022, that is 5782, this year Pesach is going to be the evening of April 15th, which means that it's a Friday, which means that Pesach is going to be on Shabbat, which means that if it's starting Friday evening, we have to get our haircuts the next day. Because believe me, you're not going to have enough time on Friday. Just trust me. Time. Einstein must be pulling some strings beyond the grave because space-time is warping and it just disappears. We lose all sense of time the day before Pesach, and you will run out of time. I guarantee it. It reminds me of the Men's Warehouse commercials from the early 2000s. He's like, you're going to like the way you look, I guarantee it. But in this case, you're going to forget how you look. I guarantee it. So you want to get your haircut the day before. Now, in the same vein of things that I have to do, being firstborn, I will be fasting the day before Pesach. Now, being a convert myself, I technically don't have to. However, it is highly recommended and it is still meritorious. So I have taken this on to do. Now, if for whatever reason, for example, hopefully you don't forget, but if you happen to forget, you're not technically sinning, so it's okay. Now, born Jews and I was going to say people whose parents converted, but then that would make you a born Jew, wouldn't it? If somebody was born Jewish and you are firstborn, then you absolutely have to. And if you are a convert and happen to be firstborn, I do highly recommend it. It is an enriching experience, and the pain of fasting is not fun, but it adds to the entire Passover experience, and it's something that I enjoy, honestly. If you can see the rest of me, you might not say that I fast very often, but, or that I enjoy it very often. But the pre-Pesach firstborn fast is something that I find enriching, and that even if you're not firstborn, you are still allowed to fast. But it is incumbent upon firstborns to do the fasting. Now, what is something that we can do? Now, what we can do is the morning before the Seder. So this particular year that this is being filmed, this is going to be Friday morning. And we're not talking, 6 or 7 in the morning. We're talking mid to late morning, even early afternoon, so around 11-ish. What we can do is that we can read a Masachet of Mishnah. Now, after we read a Masachet of Mishnah, then we are allowed to eat in what is called a Seudas Mitzvah. And a Seudas Mitzvah is when we eat to break a fast for the sake of doing a mitzvah. Rather, it's something that we do at the end of doing a mitzvah. So, and usually comes at the end of a fast. So, we're not going to quite get into the concept of a Seudas Mitzvah, but it is important to know that if you're fasting, read a tractate of the Mishnah, then you can eat. Then you can have a celebratory meal. And what's commonly done, and what I personally like to do, is read Maseches Pesach, because it is, after all, Passover. So you will review the most ancient laws of Passover. It will really get you into that Pesach mood, that Pesach spirit. It will take you back to the times of the temple. And as we'll see, Ezras Hashem, in our next video on the laws of Pesach, we'll be learning that the entire Seder itself brings us mentally, brings us spiritually, and Ezras Hashem chronologically too, with the coming of Mashiach, maybe soon in our days, to the time of the temple, to the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's almost like you're becoming a time traveler, right? You're accompanying Einstein. Uh, it is also important to note that this particular year, 2022, 5782, that because Pesach is beginning on Shabbos, on the Sabbath, that although the holiday day is normally, generally speaking, more lenient than Shabbat, because it falls on Shabbat, we don't abrogate some of those, you know, relative Shabbat stringencies. We defer to the stringencies of Shabbat. So, in other words, even though holidays are typically more lenient, because it falls on Shabbat, we observe it to that Shabbat level. When it comes to the laws of Muktzah, these are typically a little bit more lenient on Shabbat and more stringent on holidays. But here's kind of the double whammy when it comes to stringencies. That we get the stringencies of Shabbat and we get the Muktzah stringencies of the holiday. So remember to keep both of these on this year's Passover days. Now, lastly, there's a few things that I would like to discuss regarding Chol Moed. Now, what is Chol Moed, or more properly, what are Chol Moed? Chol Moed are the intermittent days, or the weekdays. Basically, just as a regular week has Monday through Friday, those are the weekdays, every holiday also has weekdays, and they're basically the same days, except for the beginning and ending days, clearly, and Shabbat. Those are all the intermittent days. And so we will be seeing that we treat these days very similar to a holiday day. It's going to sound like I'm stuttering, but I'm not. They're similar to holiday days, but they are more lenient. We are more free to go about our lives, but there are still some restrictions. And I really don't like to call them restrictions, but they are really, in essence, ways to empower our experience and enrich our experience of the holiday. So they're like bonuses, they're power ups, they're supercharging our experience of the holiday. Now, if somebody doesn't want to observe the holiday or they're, for whatever reason, just finding it practically difficult, they might feel restrictive. And sometimes with children, they can feel restrictive. However, there are ways that we can enrich our lives and enrich our experiences to really love these days. And that's also partly why sometimes people go on vacation during these days. But that's beside the point. So, generally speaking, we treat Chol Moed similar to holiday days. However, we are permitted to do the following. We are allowed to prepare food, just like on a holiday, just like on a regular weekday. We don't have to deal with Eruvin. We don't have to deal with transferring flames. We can cook food as usual. Right? So flick the light switches, turn the dials on the stove. We are allowed to do this as normal. Now, when it comes to work, if you can afford to take off work, it is highly recommended that we do so. Obviously, we'll have to put this time in advance, so if you can and would like to take off the entire week, now is the time to put that in. Send it to HR and request that time off. Believe me, if you could request it a year in advance, I'm sure that they would appreciate it. But usually companies require at least 2 weeks in advance. Now, if you cannot take work off, you are permitted to go to work. It's frowned upon, I will admit. It's not really the best thing, it's not ideal, but you are technically permitted to do so. Um, Now, if you can, how can I say this? I'm not saying to don't work while you're at work, but in any way that you can infuse your work with the spirit of the holiday, by all means. Because remember, this is still a holiday. You're working on a holiday. And I've been there before too, so I'm not condemning anybody. However, if you can take the time off, that is ideal. If you cannot, you're okay. Nobody's judging you. However, remember that when you get back home, you're coming home to a holiday. So we need to continue to keep in mind that it's still a holiday. We're going to continue infusing our lives with the blessing and the joy of these days. So when we get home, we might be stressed from work, but we can take solace in the fact that we are coming home to Pesach. So just keep that in mind. Another thing is that if we absolutely need to, we can go drive to the grocery store and buy our groceries. So, unlike Shabbat and unlike a holiday day, we are allowed to do business and conduct commerce. We are allowed to buy and sell. This includes buying things in person in brick and mortar buildings and online as well. And online is even, in some sense, better because you're not having to go out and do anything. It does not break up the holiday quite as much, doesn't disturb it quite as much. So, if you absolutely need to, we are allowed to go shopping. However, it is best that if you can, try to get your shopping done before the holiday. This is really ideal. Basically, as we'll find, anything that we can do before the holiday, even work, if we can do all of our work before the holiday, that's ideal. Now, whatever we can do before the holiday should be done before the holiday. Anything that we either completely forgot about, that we just totally slipped our minds, or that we were just physically or financially or for whatever other reason unable to perform before the holiday, we are permitted to do during Chol HaMoed, not on the holiday days, but during the intermittent days, you might call them the holiday weekdays. Now, remember, these are not just errands that we have to run, but these are things specifically for the sake of the holiday. So, if you just want to get things done that are of a chore nature, it's really best to just push those aside for right now and to try to keep those until after the holiday. Now, if something spills on the floor, by all means, wipe it up, sweep it up. But let's say that you're working on building a fence and it's only for privacy or personal enjoyment. That can wait until after the holiday. Right? It's not necessary for the holiday, and while it might increase your joy on the holiday, it would also increase your joy on every other day. So it's not specifically for the holiday. So things that are specifically for the holiday should be done beforehand. But if you can't, then during the holiday on Chol HaMoed, on the weekdays, we can do those. Everything else we should keep for after or before. Now remember, Chol Moed is almost like a half holiday day. We want to encapsulate that same holiday day spirit, but it does not come with some of the same requirements and restrictions. Now, as I said, one should try to avoid conducting business unless doing so results in a significant loss. So, if you're a day trader, you like trading stocks, try to stay off Scottrade and E-Trade, Coinbase. That'll be me. So, try to stay off these. Now, does that mean that you can't check real quick online? Yeah, it's probably best not to do that. If you are going to do it, in order to avoid incurring significant losses, you are allowed to check. But what I would recommend is try checking very briefly, don't get too involved. However, we are allowed to conduct business to avoid significant losses. If they're very minor losses, sustain it. Hashem will bless you for sanctifying Chol Moed. Those who treat the intermittent days as holidays will be blessed. So, another thing is that we should avoid This is something that I don't personally like. Not even because I always have to do it. Just something irks me about this, but this is the halacha. This can also get a little tricky when you have children. So, one should avoid doing laundry during Chol Moed. Now, it is best that if we can do laundry, this week it comes out to being Thursday. So if we can finish laundry on Thursday, that would be ideal. So for every other year, we're talking the day before Erev Pesach. So it's Erev Pesach. Now, this time we're talking about Erev, not eruv, remember? These are two different words. So the day before Pesach, is when we really would like to get our haircuts, do our laundry, finish doing all of these things in preparation for the holiday. Now, if you absolutely need to, we can do laundry, but just do it before the holiday. Try your best. And even if you do it before the holiday and for whatever reason, the slime monster comes in and all of your kids' clothes are just ruined, they need to be washed, you can wash your clothes. Okay. It's more of the intention of the holiday rather than absolutely strict halachot. Right? The halachos are still important. They are absolutely binding. We absolutely have to keep them. But also remember they are here for a reason, and they're not just rules from the ether that have, been absorbed into Yiddishkeit through osmosis. Remember, they are here for a reason. They are here for our benefit. So there are times when the halachos don't meet our needs and when they're not to our benefit, that within the halachos itself, they permit us to go around them or make exceptions. Now, there are other halachos where we can't do that. But there are times, and there are certain halachos that we can actually do that. So, second to last thing, we have the day before the day before Pesach, and now here's the last to the last thing, the second to last thing. So, unlike on Shabbat, and unlike on a holiday day, during the intermittent days, that is Chol HaMoed, there are no Sabbath limits. So that is, like I said, why people often go on vacations. You can travel, you can fly, you can drive, you can train, you can bus, you can, for whatever reason, if you like to jog, go jog up a hill and tire yourself out. We are allowed to do these things. Uh, take your camel on vacation, ride it all the way to the hotel. We're allowed to go anywhere we want. So that is the nice thing about Chol Moed, is that there are no Sabbath day limits. However, again, just as a reminder, on the day of the holiday and on Shabbat, this distance does apply. Now, the last thing, and actually, I said the last thing was the second to last thing, but the second to last thing was the third to last thing, because the last thing is now the second to last thing, because I remembered one last thing. So here was the original last thing. One should avoid moving during Chol HaMoed. Now, if you absolutely have to, again, you are allowed to. However, if you can afford to, and if it's reasonable, if it's practical, if you're in the middle of moving, try to do it before Pesach or try to do it after Pesach. That really is the ideal thing. And the thing that I just remembered, the true last thing, is that remember this is the season of our rejoicing, the season of our liberation. So we never want to be sad, and for some of us that's harder than others. However, if we can, try to inspire and arouse within ourselves that joy that accompanies the season. So, no mourning, no sadness. Remember to cheer yourself up. And if you need a little help, something just fell. If we need a little, I'm talking about picking ourselves up and something falls. It's ironic. Unlike whatever just fell, we need to pick ourselves up. We need to arise And if this requires us to treat ourselves a little bit more, go for it. Absolutely. If this involves um, buying treats or games or movies or fun stuff for the kids, absolutely do that. If that involves buying fun stuff for the grown-ups, absolutely do that. If that involves getting check lane candy, absolutely do that. We want to make this time absolutely joyous because, again, it is holiday. Many people, especially those of us coming from Christianity, we don't like that word because it's like, oh, Christmas is a holiday, Easter is a holiday. These are holidays too. They are special, joyous occasions. So they are holy days, but they're also holidays. And let's remember to treat them as both. That they are very special and unique and times that are set apart by Hashem for very significant religious purposes. But they're also times to have fun. So why not do that too? Right? Fun and holiness are not enemies, they're not opponents. We can have fun, we can joke around, we can enjoy our time, we can eat good foods, we can play games, we can laugh and we can sing and we can have wonderful, beautiful times, times that we'll always remember while still keeping things holy. So that is it for today. Um, I just want to remember that if you've not already, order your machzorim. That is the prayer books for Pesach. Um, it's actually holiday prayer books. This one is specifically for Pesach. Let's see. Hopefully this won't be backwards. Hopefully you can see it. It says Pesach right there. This is Nusach Sephard. So now, if you're wondering, when it comes to how to quote unquote do an Erev, again, we're talking about eruv. Eruv. We're not talking about Erev Pesach, right? We're talking about an eruv for Pesach. And is this annoying? Absolutely. But hopefully you won't forget, and hopefully I won't forget. No one's going to forget because annoying things stick in our mind. Psychology. So, when it comes to doing, quote unquote, doing an eruv, the Machzor will tell us everything that we need to know. Now, in this particular Machzor, it's on page 7, and as your normal eyes will probably not see, but as your backward eyes will definitely see, this tells us how to construct or how to officiate an Erev Tafshilin, Aruveitahumen, and Erev Haceros. Now, as we can see, each one has literally like 2 sentences. It's not very complicated. If any of you would like to know what these involve, I'm sure that Chabad.org has something on it. If you've exhausted all of your possibilities and you can't find anything, contact me. I'll hook you up. I'll take a picture of this, I'll type it out, and whatever we need to do, we'll get this accomplished. So let's all for one for all, get ready for Pesach. This has been a great class series, and I'm talking like it's over. We still have a week. We have one more class, one more official class, anyways, without any bonus videos, and that is going to cover the Seder Night, which is going to be one of my favorite classes of all time, at least for the halakhic sections, and we're going to be using 2 very incredibly helpful books. Again, these might be backwards. I do apologize. But these are by Rabbi Yosef Zvi Rimon, and they're simply called the Seder Night and Pesach Pagoda. They're purple with golden Seder plates on them. I assume they're Seder plates. They look like them. And they are absolutely brilliant works. Here's the Pesach Pagoda. As you can see, it's shiny, just like a Seder plate would be in real life. Now this is the Haggadah really is wonderful. One, it instructs us not only how to conduct the Seder, but it also gives us some brilliant insights and teachings regarding the significance of every step of the Seder. It's beautifully illustrated and it has some wonderful pictures for us. That's just an example. Let's see, let's try to find another one with some pictures in it. Who doesn't like pictures? Seriously. Actually, here's a good one. Here's one with lots of beautiful charts and tables for our learning benefit. Let's say, hopefully that was an intelligible demonstration there. It wasn't all wacky. The most important stuff is oftentimes either bolded or in giant print, so even just the very layout of these is incredible. These are some of my favorite halakhic books ever. Just the way that they're organized, that they're laid out. Again, the diagrams, pictures, charts, graphs, everything. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, in the Seder night, let's see. These also have some incredibly useful things at the end of each chapter. Let's see if I can get to it real quick. Here's just one example. So, as with everything in Judaism, there are debates about how we are to do things, how much to do them, how often, to what degree, etc. So, in this particular one, we're looking at how much matzah we're actually supposed to eat in order to fulfill the commandment of eating matzah on Pesach. And this is just giving us some of the information about how much of the matzah to eat. Now, according to some opinions, you will, and what's really nice, they give us these great measurements in machine-made modern matzah. So everybody knows what these are like. Everybody's familiar with the machine-made matzahs from Yehuda and Manischewitz and from other sources. Um, so these are really easy. And in fact, next time for the next video, I would like to get some matzah and break it to give us a demonstration. Now here is one of my most valuable resources, educational resources, the secret blue folder. Now, what is in this blue folder? Well, it's a secret. I can't tell you. Just kidding. So, from this book, Seder Night, I very perfectly, very perfectly photocopied each of the charts in at the end of each chapter. Now, for me, what I personally did is every every side of the debate, every opinion, every perspective that I personally hold by, that I accept, it's the halachas that I go by, or rather the perspective of the halacha that I go by, I outlined in red Sharpie to make it abundantly clear to myself. I need obvious reminders. I made it abundantly clear to myself which ones I go by so that as I'm going through the Seder, I can very easily go down and follow this without worrying. So here's a good one. They're all good, but here's one that I would like to particularly talk about. How much wine or the grape juice, both are acceptable, and actually great chachamim used grape juice instead of wine. Did you know that? And other great chachamim used wine instead of grape juice. Both are entirely acceptable. Now, how much must one drink? There are differing opinions on this. And as we'll see, I particularly like the opinion of the Chazon Ish. And so when it comes to Pesach, I very often have found myself agreeing with his perspective, with his measurements, with his explanations, and I think that he does a very good job at it. So I won't necessarily be teaching just his perspective. I would like to also teach others. For those who see things differently than I do, I think other perspectives can be very valuable. And we'll go from there. There are also times when, let's see, why don't we recite a blessing on the mitzvah of relating the story of the Exodus from Egypt? Now, many different rabbis have offered explanations on this, and these are all opinions. They're people's individual thoughts. And here are two opinions that I personally like. So as you can see, I followed the little line down to the box and highlighted it with red Sharpie. Now, for those of you who'd like to do the same thing, you are by all means welcome to do so. So that will end us tonight. Say goodbye to the matcha and to Pesach learning for right now. But don't banish that information from our minds because we want to remember all this information and never say goodbye to it. So you can say goodbye to me, but not the halacha. So until next time, I hope you all do well, and thank you for joining me.